is we're going to just finish up chapter 1. We're not going to get into chapter 2. We'll save that for next week. I've got some things I want to talk about today, and a demonstration I want to give you and talk about some things that aren't really in this chapter, but it kind of plant seeds for what Amy's going to talk about later in the semester. What we're going to talk about later in the semester, and some things that you'll see in clinicals, or you should see in clinicals anyway, as far as not only radiation protection, but also image production. Okay, so so what I usually do is I start off with a review of what we talked about before, so we're going to run through that real quickly. So, let me find page 1. So, we talked about on Friday of last week, we talked about the nature of our surroundings. We talked about mass and energy, everything being mass or energy, or, you know, kind of, I won't say a combination of both, but maybe one using the other for its own purposes. So, mass is anything that's made of atoms and it has matter, or matter has mass. Mass and matter measured in kilograms, and kilograms we said was not the same as weight. We kind of equate it to weight, but it's not really the same as weight, and we use some analogies to kind of get to that. So weight, just by definition, is the effects of gravitational pull on matter. And I'm going to ask forgiveness. I told my wife I'd leave she's got a doctor's appointment this morning, and I told her I'd leave my phone where she could get in touch with me if she needed to. So, and that was not her, that was Amy. So we might get a couple of dings here, but I usually don't do that. So weight is the gravitational pull on matter, right? So it's not the same thing as mass, but we use them kind of interchangeably. So we have that, and then we talk about energy. And the energy, I don't think I really gave you the definition of energy. It's just the ability to do work, and then we divided it out to the different types of energy. So we talked about potential energy, and where do we see potential energy in the X-ray tube? What technical factor controls potential energy? KVP, right. So potential energy is the ability to make X-rays. We're not making X-rays yet. It's not until we send those electrons across the tube. The higher the KVP, the faster they travel across the tube. And when they travel across the tube, that is what kind of kinetic energy, right? So that's the energy of motion. So potential energy is the energy of position. It's stored energy. It's the ability to do work by virtue of where it's at, right? So kinetic energy is the energy of motion. So our potential is released, we have motion. Chemical energy is the energy of chemical interactions. I think Bushong, no. I was thinking he put chemical energy in, or dynamite in chemical energy, which it kind of is, but it's also, you know, you got thermal there as well. But batteries, you know, your body is in digestion as an example of chemical energy. You're creating energy out of matter, or in a case of batteries, you've got a compound that creates electric flow, stores electricity, and then releases it. So electric energy is just energy of moving electrons. So anytime we're talking about electricity, electron equals electricity. We're not talking about moving protons. We're not going to be doing that. We're going to be moving electrons. So we've got that. Thermal energy is heat, and that is kinetic energy at the molecular level. So, you know, you kind of rub your hands together, you create heat. But even more applicable to what we're doing, if we send electrons through a circuit, we're going to create heat. So we're always going to create two things with electricity, and one is we're going to create a magnetic field, and we're going to use that, you know, and talk about it later on, but we're going to use that in our transformers to adjust our KVP and our mass. So that's number one. We're going to create heat, and we're going to create a magnetic field. So that's electric energy, movement of electrons. Nuclear energy is the energy inside the nucleus of the atom. Electromagnetic energy is what we eventually want to create in the X-ray tube, but only represents a very, very small portion of what we actually create. So electromagnetic energy exists on a spectrum that we'll talk about later in the semester, and it goes from very long wavelength radio frequency waves all the way up to X and gamma rays. So we have a lot of different types of electromagnetic energy. Some can potentially be harmful. X-rays and gamma rays can potentially be harmful. Infrared, you know, it's heat, it can burn you. UV light, can that hurt you? Yeah, you get a sunburn, you get enough sunburn, you're probably gonna get skin cancer, right? So potentially can hurt you. Incidentally enough, and we'll talk about this again later in the semester, X-rays will burn you too. If you get exposed to too many X-rays, you get what in the early stages looks like sunburn. Later on, it looks like something else. It looks truly like a burn. But X-rays burn you as well. But you have to be exposed to a very high volume. And the kind of technical factors that we use in diagnostic, you're just not going to see that. You're not going to burn your patients. If a patient got stuck in a CT and it just went through, you know, cycle after cycle after cycle, it would potentially cause radiation burn. In most recent years, probably the places that we've seen radiation burns more than anywhere else would be in interventional, and even that's very rare. Okay, so X-rays can create a burn, but it is pretty rare. So then we talk about radiation. Radiation is just transfer of energy. We've looked at some examples of that, you know, sound waves, but what we're really interested in here is electromagnetic energy and that type of radiation. Not all radiation is bad. A lot of it has to do with the intensity of the radiation. Like even light, you know, light, you getting hurt by that fluorescent light? What if we concentrated it into a laser? What could you do with a strong enough laser? Yeah, you can burn somebody, you can cut metal if you have a you know, concentrated enough beam of light. So even harmless light can become dangerous if it's concentrated enough. There are some differences in what you can do with the different types of electromagnetic energy. You can't focus X-rays. So, you know, you can't make an X-ray laser. So we'll talk about that later in the semester. So what we're really kind of concentrating on is a small portion of the electromagnetic spectrum that we refer to as ionizing radiation. And ionizing radiation is radiation with a high enough energy level that it can remove an orbital electron. Remember again, it's all about the electrons. We're not going to be moving any protons out of atoms. It's going to be electron. So you knock an electron out, and what does an atom become? It was neutral, now it is a, well, yeah, well, a little bit. Unstable, it's not in its most stable state. Neutral.
It's a negative ion.
It's a negative ion, well, it's a positive ion.
Oh, it's a negative ion, and the remaining atom is a positive ion.
The atom is a positive ion, the electron is negative ion. So you created two, and just like your shoes, you have a ion pair, right? So you create ion, yeah. So the atom becomes positive, and you get that free floating electron. So those types of energy levels of electromagnetic radiation are potentially harmful. So you want to limit your radiation to that, and that's how or your exposure to that, and that's how we're going to kind of end this lecture today. So just so you know, being exposed just means you intercepted electromagnetic radiation. So if somebody says make an exposure, that means you expose the patient to electromagnetic radiation. If they say I got exposed, that's what they're talking about. Okay, it's just interception of electromagnetic radiation. So then we talk about sources of ionizing radiation. And fundamentally we have two sources. One is natural, and we talked about that. We get it from the stars and from the sun. We get it from radon, building materials. You've got you know, things in the earth, plutonium, things like that put off radiation that you receive. So you got that, and then you've got man-made. And with man-made, what we've got are the radioactive isotopes that we put inside of patients in nuclear medicine are man-made, but so is X-ray, you know, the X-rays that we create in diagnostics, CT, and mammography, special procedures, intervention, all that. So overwhelmingly, the greatest radiation dose, especially in the man-made, is going to be in diagnostic X-rays. CT, I'm grouping now, you know, any kind of X-ray creating and emitting medical procedure. Okay, so we have any questions on all of that? No? Okay, so then now we're going to talk about discovery of X-rays. And X-ray discovery, it was an accidental discovery. A lot of people were playing around with electricity and trying to determine exactly what electricity was and how we could best use it. If this is up, I'm going to find a video real quick. If we have, I'm not going to boot it up. It is. Okay, so I'm going to try to continue the lecture while I try to find video. Our keyboard's fried. I have to hit Control Alt Delete, and here's my control button. Anybody want to push that for me? So, so what they were doing was that they were running electricity through a, you know, it's kind of like a light bulb, and it's what we refer to as a Crookes tube. And they were trying to figure out what they could do with electricity. And how it behaved in certain circumstances. So a lot of people were working on it. It wasn't just the guy who's accredited with discovery of X-ray. His name was William Conrad Röntgen, a German scientist. But Tesla was actually working on it, and there is some evidence that Tesla discovered it before Röntgen. I don't know that that's ever been truly proven, but there is evidence that, you know, that he got to the conclusion and discovered, you know, noticed X-rays before Röntgen did. So, how he noticed the X-rays were that he, you know, was just playing around with electricity. He wasn't looking for X-rays. He wasn't looking for anything specific, just to see if he could figure out what electricity was before anybody else. I mean, we were using it, they just didn't know what it was. And so, trying to be exhaustive and, you know, cover all his bases, what he did was he took this tube and he covered it with like a black dense, thick paper, kind of like construction. So what he had was this, I thought I had it in here. I did, awesome. Okay, I'm gonna activate publish a page in Canvas. I'll show it to you. These videos are actually posted. I just, for whatever reason, didn't have it active. So, all right. So, a cathode ray tube is just a tube where, you know, we're sending electrons across the tube.
Okay. This is a cathode ray tube. What it essentially is, it's a vacuum chamber. There are no gases inside this glass tube. The only thing we have are two electrodes. One is called the cathode, the other is called the anode, and a fluorescent screen
Okay.
in the background.
Let me explain what fluorescence is. You think of fluorescence as being fluorescent light, right? And all fluorescence is glow in response to a stimulus. Okay, so the fluorescent lights are full of gases. So we run some electricity through a fluorescent light, and what happens is we get an interaction between the electricity, the electrons, and the gases inside, and it glows. That's how fluorescent lights work, essentially. Okay. So fluorescence means glow in response to a stimulus. So that's what he's saying is that there's a coating inside of this cathode ray tube that shows fluorescent properties. So once he starts sending electrons through this, it'll glow.
When I turn the power supply on, we'll see a beam that causes that fluorescent screen to glow. Looks like a nice straight line, doesn't it? We call that a cathode ray because it emanates or begins at the cathode and shoots across over to the anode. J.J. Thomson was working with cathode rays. We really didn't understand what they were. I mean, we have electricity going in one side and coming out the other, but there's nothing inside to conduct it. It's a vacuum tube. So he decided to apply a magnetic field to this cathode ray, and he found something interesting. We apply one pole of the magnet to this beam, and we'll see what it does, and then we'll flip it around and see what the other pole does. This is my favorite part. Can you see what's happening to that beam?
Okay.
It does appear as though it's happening to it.
You see what was going on? It was dipping, right? It was weird, huh? So, what do you know about electrons? Negatively charged. What do you know about magnets? They have two charges. They have positive and negative charge, right? So, what do you know about opposites? They attract. And what do you know about likes? They repel, right? So, he's got a magnet. He didn't tell us which end of the magnet he was putting close to the cathode ray tube, but what did you see? He brought the magnet down, and where'd they go?
The
Opposite direction, right? So he's got the negative end of the magnet mashing down towards the cathode ray tube, and that's what you saw was the electrons going away from that, negative end of the magnetic field. Okay, so you're thinking, it might have occurred to you, electromagnetic energy. What's electromagnetic energy? It has electric and magnetic properties. Okay, so this is a stream of electrons giving off light that we can distort that light with the negative end of this battery, or negative end of the magnet.
It's moving, it's being repelled, isn't it, by the magnet. When we flip the magnet around, what do you think is going to happen this time? Well, if it's being attracted on one pole, see how it's being attracted there? Let me rotate it so the kids on this side of the room can see it. See how it's being attracted there? And then the other pole, do you see how it's being pushed down?
So we have opposites attract and like charges repel, exactly. So this is an example of a Crookes tube, and this is kind of what they were working with. And this,
viewers, just would like to show you a couple of Crookes tubes that I've
okay, so this guy's got a pretty strong accent, and that's a bold statement for somebody from East Texas. But I'm going to fast forward through some of this to get to the applicable content because it's a 5-minute long video, and it's what I want you to see is not the whole thing. So you've got this Maltese cross here, and what he's going to do is he's going to send electrons again through this thing from cathode to anode. And I'd love to have one of these things, not the cross, but a Crookes tube. But this cross that's inside can drop, and you'll see that here in a minute. And it's pretty interesting to see what happens.
There's a metal target to cast a shadow on the fluorescent screen at the back. This particular tube has a...
It's working on my tinnitus.
to allow the electrons to pass through, and they impinge on a fluorescent screen which illuminates, and then you can show how a magnetic field can deflect the moving electrons and pass the magnet near it.
So kind of the same thing he's doing.
So you can see the electron deflection going on.
All right, so I'm gonna fast forward to here. So he's getting some radiation out of this. You hear the little clicking?
Yeah.
Okay, so he's getting some ionizing radiation out of this. And whether or not Rankin had any kind of Geiger counter, or not. I don't even know that Geiger counter was a thing in 1895. But whether or not he had anything that would measure, invisible light like ionizing radiation, I can't tell you. I really don't know. Hadn't occurred to me to look it up until like just now. But I'm going to discuss again how it is that he made the discovery here in a bit, and it's totally accidental. All right, so now he's got the projection of the stream of electricity, and it's interacting with the cross that's on the inside. Just more of the same. And now look. Crosses down, and he's still getting that shadow.
So
right?
just like the Maltese cross tiger ever, I mean, you can see the shadow that remains.
So why does the shadow remain? Well, it could be a few things. Just analytically going through it, he clearly stopped the flow of electrons before he dropped the cross. In some of the videos, you'll actually see him kind of jolt the tube, and a cross will drop, and you'll still see the shadow of it. He turned it off and then re-energized. So there might have been a little bit of memory, in the fluorescent material, and it might have exhibited just a little bit of glow that we couldn't really see after the stream of electrons were ended. And that's a property of fluorescence that we call phosphorescence. So, and that's not on the test, so you can take it down if you want to, but you don't have to. But it's phosphorescence, and phosphorescence is kind of like fluorescence, except for sometimes it hangs on to a little bit of that glow. So I'll talk a little bit more about that here in a bit. It really doesn't have an impact on our imaging system now, but it did in screens back when we used to use films. And what I want to finally get to is the distortion of the cross.
The flow of electrons
Again,
exert a force
with,
on the paddle wheel.
and it's not on this one. Okay, so there's another video. I thought it was on this one. It's not, and I'm not going to waste any more time on these. You kind of get the point, right? So they were experimenting with these tubes, and they were like, I don't really get what's going on here, but something's happening. So Rankin took it a step further, and he said, what's going to happen if I can't see the flow of electrons? If I can't see the glow inside of this thing, inside of this tube, what's going to happen if I send the electrons across the tube? So he covered it completely where no light would get out of it. And you got to understand, it's 1895. His lab, I think, was in the basement, so probably no light, external light at all. He turns off the light, and he covers the tube, and he turns off the light, and he energizes the tube, and what he sees at a distance is he's got this is kind of a common lab component. It's called barium platinocyanide, and he had a plate that was covered with it, and that plate that he couldn't see until he energized the tube, he could see glowing. Okay. It was, again, at a distance. No light was coming out of this thing because it was completely covered, but he could still see it glow. So he knew he had something, some sort of invisible stimulus that was hitting that plate and making it glow. And he said, I don't know what this is either, but this is something. So he locked himself in his basement, essentially, for 2 weeks, and he studied it hard enough that, most of what we still think we know about X-rays forms a foundation for how it is that we teach how X-rays are created, emitted, interact in the patient's body, and then eventually expose an image receptor. Okay? So that's kind of the history behind the creation of it, but the problem with it is that what we had at the time were, you know, the Crookes tube, and it was very inefficient. We're still inefficient. I told you last week that whenever we create x-rays, what percentage of the x-rays, or what percentage of the energy that we create in the x-ray tube actually comes out as x-rays?
1%.
Yeah, so as low as 1%, as high as 10% if we're really high kVp. So it's still inefficient, but with those it was much more so. You just couldn't make an x-ray with it, a good x-ray, right? So they had to do some things to make it medical. And it wasn't right away that they figured out that the x-rays would penetrate and create an x-ray. So, you know, they continued to play with it. Rankin wound up getting the Nobel Prize for his discovery. And the development of new tubes came relatively quickly for the age. So, you know, by the early 1900s, we had good x-ray tubes. We went from a Crookes tube to a Coolidge tube, and that's kind of what we still use today. It's a version of the same type of tube that they were using very early on. But the radiation dose was still extremely high, okay? And part of the reason for that is because we were using, or they were using, transformers that could not create really high energy x-rays, okay? So what you might think is that, you know, if you were to take an x-ray with 40 kVp, you're probably not going to penetrate anything. You know, we'd say that you start a thin anatomy at maybe 55 or 60 kVp, right? Chest x-ray, you're using how much? 110, very good. You've been paying attention to, you know, what they're setting in lab and in clinicals. So 110 kVp. So the difference between 110 and 40, pretty significant, right? But I'm here to tell you, you can create a chest x-ray with 40 kVp. But if you're gonna create a chest x-ray with 40 kVp, you have to have so many x-rays that it becomes unhealthy for the patient in order to receive that. Okay, so we don't want to use 40 kVp, but that's kind of what they were having to do because they didn't have the transformers that would get them up to 110 kVp. So they came up with Snooks transformers, increased kVp. As they increased kVp, they could decrease the mass and it became much safer. But still, I want you to notice a couple of things, a couple of pictures in the book, is if you look on page 8, figure 1.7, that's the first known x-ray made. All right, so I got to stop on this. That's the first known x-ray that was made for diagnosis of a fracture. That little kid, he's a big kid, really. Yeah. What does it say? He's like 12 or 13? He looks pretty close to full grown. He's corn fed, right? So that was the first one that we know of where x-rays were used to make a diagnosis of a broken bone. He broke his arm, his kid, he broke his arm. And I want to say somewhere it says that x-ray took like an hour to make or something like that. It was long exposure. Now think about being a 12-year-old kid with a hurting arm trying to be still, right? So extremely high exposure, very inefficient, and just not practical at all. So we had to do some more things to make it more practical. So what we used to use is film, which you're not familiar with, even from a non-medical imaging standpoint, because all of your pictures are digital now, right? Mm-hmm. But what film was, get the terrible markers out of the way, I'm phone down here. What film was a, what you had was a base, some sort of foundation, and you have what we refer to as an emulsion on top of it. And film, this photographic film, is sensitive to light, okay? So what happens whenever you take a picture on your phone is you hear that squeak sound, you know, or the clicking sound. Well, what that is an audible representation of what actually used to happen in a camera. You had this little diaphragm that remained shut and locked tight until you push the button, you wound up your your camera, and you pushed a button, and what happened was that diaphragm would open and close really quickly. It let light in, the light interacted with the film, and it put the image on the film, okay? It's basically the same principle in X-ray. What we did was we took a film and we put it inside of a cassette. Imagine like your laptop, being a thing that opens like your laptop, but when you close it, it's airtight and it's light tight. No light gets in or out. So you take this film and you stick it inside of it, and what you got a base foundation, and eventually what we used was polyester because it's stable. There was one type of stuff that we used that was cellulose nitrate. That was dangerous. Cellulose nitrate, what's the second part of nitrate? Or cellulose nitrate, give it away. Nitrate, right. Very, very flammable. Hospitals were burning down. I think Amy has a video that she's going to show you at some point about hospitals, hospital fires. So that was a very real problem for a long time. So all X-ray film was stored in one place, and if it caught fire, it was just fire you weren't going to put out. It's kind of like you've seen the videos of like some of your cell phones that catch on fire, that a fire extinguisher just, won't kill it.
Speed through the fire extinguisher?
No, you spray it all day, and it's an angry fire that it can't be quenched. It's just got to run its course, right? So eventually we wound up on polyester as a blue base. So what we put on that polyester base was an emulsion, and the emulsion was just like the emulsion on a photographic film, only that it's just black and white. X-ray films were sensitive to white light as well. That's why we had to put them in those light, tight cassettes, okay? So when we made the exposure, then 100% of the image receptor exposure, which was film here, was made by the X-rays, okay? But somebody came along and they remembered what it was that Rankin had noticed, okay? So certain things glow in response to X-rays, right? So what they did was on the inside of this light tight box, they put I don't want to draw this. Okay, so black is the box, orange is the emulsion, and then we've got the green is what we refer to as an intensifying screen. Okay, so what the intensifying screen does is it intensifies the image. So you put anatomy over the top of this, this box thing, and you make an exposure, and it picks up the signal in the anatomy that you expose, and it blocks the X-rays. Your anatomy blocks the X-rays proportional to the density or the hardness of the tissue. Goes through soft tissue real easy. Doesn't go through bone very easy, right? So more X-rays go through here, right, and expose and make a darker area on the film than over the bone, right? So what happens then is what remnant X-ray is striking this intensifying screen, it makes it glow. And that glow is more of what exposed the film than what did the X-rays. So we're using X-rays to create a glow that would then expose the film. So we're not just getting exposure on the film from the X-rays, we're getting exposure on the film from the light that's glowing off of the intensifying screen. It intensified the image, okay? It intensified the signal to create the image. So radiation dose was dramatically reduced on an order of maybe 1/200th of, the original dose to the patient. And somebody else came along, they said, well, what if we did that twice? These X-rays, they penetrate things. They don't just hit and stop. They penetrate through. So if they penetrate through your bone, and they penetrate through that and that to get to that, is it much of a stretch to say it's also going to penetrate that, most likely? So what if we put another one, another emulsion on this side, and then a second intensifying screen also on this end of the cassette, so that we sandwich two images on top of each other and further cut down the dose? Sound like maybe a good thing to do? Reduce patient dose? Yeah, so what we did was double emulsion film with intensifying screens, and our patient dose eventually, maybe not right away, but eventually dropped to about 1/400th of what it was. So now that kid that got the x-ray that took so long is much quicker, right? So all about patient dose on this. Okay, so now we've got technology in place that reduces the patient dose. We're having radiation burns a lot. As a matter of fact, Thomas Edison developed what we know as fluoroscopy, that's moving x-rays. He's the one that developed that. They didn't have any of this. If you look on page 9, it looks to me, I don't know this for sure, but it looks to me like his x-ray tube is in a wooden box, right? So wood doesn't really absorb a whole lot of x-rays. When you first do traumas, you'll notice that the backboard doesn't show up all that well. The runners on the backboard might show up, but the backboard itself, it just doesn't show up all that well. So x-rays go through it pretty easy. All right, so there's nothing blocking those x-rays. There's nothing, when we create x-rays on the face of the target, and they go off in all directions with equal intensity. Okay, it's what we refer to as isotropic emissions. So again, that's not this test, but file that away somewhere. Isotropic emissions means equal intensity in all directions. So now apply that to what you're seeing with Edison in figure 1.8. Where are they getting exposed? Everywhere. Every square centimeter of their body is getting blasted. So his lab assistant, who was also a very good friend of his, wound up dying of radiation exposure. His hands rotted off, essentially. Okay, so it's still very harmful. So we still have to have a way to make it much more safe. Okay, so when we create x-rays, even though we set 100 kVp, let's say, we're going to create x-rays from effectively 0 kVp all the way up to 100. Okay, those 100 kVp x-ray photons penetrate anything you put in front of it within reason, including your lead apron. Okay, so it'll go all the way through you, it'll go through your apron, it'll go through anything you put in front of it. Those 0 kVp x-ray photons aren't going to go through anything. They're going to stop, and they're just going to give you a skin dose. So are they going, what we're trying to do is we're trying to create an image, right? So are they contributing anything to that goal of creating an image? No. So why have them? No reason, right? Also, is there a reason, if that truly is, you know, a wooden box, is there a reason to have those x-rays going in all directions out of that box? The answer is no. So your x-ray tube, you go into the lab today, that box is not made of, you know, wood, right? It's very solid, it's got lead lining inside of it. There's very few x-rays that are coming out of that box except for where we want them to come from. So we'll put it in something that'll block those isotropic emissions just to the useful beam. That's step one. Step two, we've got double emulsion screens. All right, and then we need to get rid of those low energy x-ray photons. So how we did that was another guy came along. His name was also William, but it was Rollins. He was a dentist. So, you know, he was smart enough to know that you don't need a whole lot to get through teeth. You know, teeth are pretty small. So what he did was two things. One is that he wanted to eliminate those low energy x-ray photons, so he used what we refer to as filtration. Very thin sheets of aluminum just to block those low energy photons that wouldn't make it through your skin anyway. So if they won't make it through aluminum, you know, or if they won't make it through your skin, they won't make it through aluminum. So that blocks those low energy photons. What you're left with is a more high energy X-ray beam. Those low energy photons go away. So filtration, what is the purpose of filtration?
To stop the low energy.
Stop the low energy X-ray photon. File this away, it hardens the X-ray beam. A hardened X-ray beam is one where you have fewer low energy X-ray photons, more high energy X-ray photons. Okay, so a hardened X-ray beam, remove those low energy photons so that what we were left with is a safer beam. And then he also invented beam restriction. So what beam restriction is, you'll hear it referred to as collimation. Collimation is blocking the beam. You're going to have a tendency to think of it as focusing the X-ray beam, but you don't. You can't focus X-rays. You can focus the stream of electrons, and we'll get there later in the semester, but you can't focus the X-ray beam. Once the X-ray beam is an X-ray beam, it is what it is. You know, it's going to expose what you expose it to. So beam restriction is blocking. It's kind of like just putting shutters on something. Okay, so you got shutters at your house over your windows. Some of you probably have blinds, yeah. So blinds, what do blinds do? They turn off the sun.
They block the light.
They just block the light. They don't, you know, they don't do anything except for blocking the light. Right, it doesn't focus, it doesn't do anything, it just blocks some of the light. And that's what collimators do. So you increase collimation. When you increase collimation, that means you get a smaller field size and you expose less tissue, less of the patient's tissue. So if you expose less tissue, the patient gets less dose. Okay, increased collimation means smaller radiation field, smaller light field. Okay, decreased collimation, you open it up. So Rollins invented those two things. He didn't really call it, it was beam restriction, but he didn't call it collimators. Collimators are where you have the dials. His was a diaphragm. So he took a piece of lead with a hole in it, and he just made it to where he could wrap it around the patient's face and, you know, thereby block the X-rays from hitting the patient. Okay, so Rollins, filtration, hardening the beam, lowering the patient dose, beam restriction, also lowered the patient dose as well. Okay, those were his two contributions. So all of that reduced the patient dose, and now we've got something that is much more safe, and people are not dying and getting burned quite as often as what they were. All right, so that was all patient reduction in patient exposure. We also started using gonadal shielding. You know, you can take the lead apron and put it over the patient. I think we touched on this last week in that the recent research in shielding and things like that suggests that that actually shielding the patient may increase the patient's dose. We talked about that in here, not at sophomores, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. So just understand that it's in here as a means of shielding, but it's probably going to come out eventually in future editions. And I don't think it's on the registry to use contact shielding for the patient anymore. So, or it won't be for y'all, most likely. So that's all patient dose, but we still have to deal with your radiation dose. If you're going to be working with patients and working with radiation, you also need to cut your dose back as well. Okay, so for the patient, really, we want to keep the dose as, what's the acronym? Yeah, as low as reasonably achievable. So that's what all these are for, but also the proper technique. We use proper technique, right KVP for the right exam. You don't want to use that 40 KVP for a chest x-ray. Even though I said you can, you can't, okay? It don't, all right? It'll get a bad job done, but you don't want to do a bad job. So the other things are 3 different things that Amy might have touched on. And what are those? For your radiation dose, you want 3 steps. Time, distance, shielding, right? Yeah. So what's our time? Speaking of time. we're almost at an hour. Okay, so go grab your waters or your drink. Okay. I didn't want to grab theirs because they got laptop on. I'm going to borrow your desk. Sorry. I could unlock that, but why? You know, why do something the easy way when you can do it the hard way? Okay, so you got a few things. We're going to touch on this again later on. And here, I'll turn these over. So, yeah. Oh, that didn't work. There. Yeah, we'll do it like that. Okay, so we're going to talk about this later in the semester as well, but it's worth, you know, because you're in clinical practice now. You're doing fluoro? Anybody been in a fluoro? Okay. Very applicable for fluoro. So you're taking a diagnostic x-ray, not a fluoro, you're taking a foot x-ray. Is there a reason for you to be in the x-ray room? Almost never. Almost never. So you get behind the control panel, right? The one exception would be, or the exceptions would be if the patient just can't be still. So you got a pediatric patient, somebody might have to hold that. Not you, but a technologist might have to hold that. And aside from those very rare cases, there's not a reason for somebody to be in the room for most x-rays, okay? But you got to be in there for fluoro. So if you're in there for fluoro, you're gonna take a dose. Just can't get around it. You gotta take a dose, okay? So let's say, the patient dose is gonna come directly from the x-ray tube. Yours is not. Yours is gonna come from the patient in a form of Compton scatter radiation. So x-rays are gonna do one of three things fundamentally. One of those is gonna be broken down into two possibilities. But one is it's going to penetrate and it's going to expose the image receptor. Those are good. One is going to absorb inside of the patient, and that's bad for the patient, but for the image, that's also good. Because we have to have the contrast, the difference between the blacks and the whites on the image so that we can see the anatomy and make the diagnosis. The other is just all bad, and that's scatter radiation. That's where your dose is going to come from, is scatter radiation. So let's say this book represents the area that we're doing a fluoroscopy on the patient. I'm going to put this book right in the middle of this desk. Okay, so the desk is the fluoro table. You're doing a fluoro with a patient. Here's your very robotic radiologist. Okay, so you're standing, the radiologist is going to want you, if you're doing an upper GI, is going to want you to hand the patient some barium or some crystals or something. You got to get up with the patient at some point, right? So, the radiologist says, okay, give them thin barium. So patient's right there, they're laying on their side, kind of semi-prone, whatever. And so you reach up under and you give it to the patient. Is there a reason for you to stay right here? What are your three rules? Time, distance, shielding. Right. Okay, so there's a law. The difference between a theory and a law is that a theory is well-founded. A law is not only well-founded, but is proven to be accurate every single time. Okay? So it's what we refer to as the inverse square law. And the inverse square law says that the intensity of, in this case, it's going to be electromagnetic radiation, will decrease by a square of the change in distance. Okay, so what does that mean? Or the radiation exposure will change by an inverse of the square, the inverse, and change of distance. I'm stumbling all through this. Okay, so what do those words mean? What does inverse mean? Opposite, right. So something goes up, something goes down. Okay, so what are your three rules? Time, distance, shielding, right? So we're dealing with distance at this point. You're doing a fluoro case, so really the only control anybody has in that room over time is the radiologist stepping on the pedal. You have no control over that. You're in the room, right? But you can do something about the other two, right? So distance. So inverse square law says that in this case, the intensity is going to decrease as we increase our distance. okay? So I'm standing right here, patient's being exposed right here. What's my distance? It's about a foot.
Yeah.
It's about a foot, right? So if I just take one step back, now how much is my distance?
2 feet.
About 2 feet, right? So it's the inverse square law. The intensity decreases by the square of the increase in distance. Okay? How much of a distance did I increase?
1 foot.
1 foot, which was effectively twice as much as what I had, right? I had 1 foot, now I've got 2 feet, so my increase is double. So what's the square of 2?
4.
4. It's an inverse square law. I doubled my distance, my intensity dropped by 2 times 2,
4.
by a factor of 4. Right,
It's by a factor of 4.
by a factor of 4. Right, so if I'm getting 1 millisievert right here, and we'll talk about that here in a minute. If I'm getting 1 millisievert right here, what am I getting right here? It dropped by a factor of 4.
0.25.
So it'd be 0.25, it'd be 1/4. That's pretty dramatic,
Yeah.
right? Well, do you have to be right here? Can you be right here? Yeah. Okay. So, can I be, you know, don't get stupid with it, you know? You're gonna freak the patient out if you back up all the way up against it. Right. But there's something else you can do, okay? That's why I brought this right here. So, if I'm standing right here, am I still getting hit? Okay. So, let's say my radiologist has a little more beef on him than this camera, right? What are your other things? We already said that time is off the table. You can't control that at all. Shielding. So you're wearing an apron, right? What's he wearing? Apron, right? So what do x-rays do? They either penetrate, scatter, or absorb, right? So you got this $250,000 a year absorber right here, wearing an apron. You're wearing an apron. If not only I step back, but I go, how much are you earning in clinicals? Nothing, right? If it's truly a radiologist, he's probably making more than $250,000 a year. That was, you know, a long time ago, $250,000. So what am I getting right now? Almost nothing, right? So you've used distance, you've backed up your distance, and you've exponentially increased your shielding, right? So the only thing that you might be getting is if something's bouncing off the ceiling and coming back down to you, you know, you can't wear a helmet or anything like that. But you can do this, right? So what if we have a patient who's a radiologist who's small, very small, or a PA, you know? I know we've got some female PAs, and, you know, next thing you're gonna be bigger than any one of the female PAs, most likely. So what? You know, you're still gonna get hit, right? But can you do anything? What's that? Please don't crouch down. I did not say crouch. I did not say crouch down. You're gonna freak your patients out. No, you're not gonna crouch down. All right. So, but what you can do is you can understand the physics of x-rays. Okay, so light bends, right? We can refract light. One characteristic of x-rays that don't behave like light is that you can't bend them. Okay, they go in a straight line until they hit something, and once they hit something, they're going to do one of those 3 things: scatter, penetrate, or absorb. One of those 3 things, right? So they're going to travel in a straight line. So line of sight is important, okay? Now, I used to play paintball. Anybody ever play paintball? Or airsoft, either one? Okay, airsoft. So you can back me up on this. Line of sight's important for things that travel in a straight line. I used to play with this guy. Okay, I got to be delicate here because, you know, this is going out. He was a big guy. He's like 5'8", and he's 400 pounds. Okay, he's a big guy. And it was kind of, funny sometimes. Sometimes he didn't realize how big it was. So we played woods ball. We didn't play, like in they have paintball fields where they've got the little Doritos and, the inflatable things. We played in the woods. We played in the woods. So Randy, being this wide, would try to hide behind a tree that was that big. It was the funniest thing in the world. You just pepper him up. Stop! He couldn't hide behind that, but could he? Well, he could turn sideways, but the man was thicker than he was wide. That didn't help. But could he? Okay. So, can you see my face? Okay. All right. So, what if I do this?
A little bit less.
A little bit less. Right. So, let's say you've got a small radiologist. Am I getting hit right here? Okay, this is coming off of this patient. Am I getting hit right here? Yeah. If this continues, if I back up, am I getting hit? No. Okay, let's go the other way with it and say we've got a large area fluoroscopy, and this is extreme. You're never going to fluoro this big. But let's say you got a small radiologist. I'm creating x-rays out here. Am I getting hit? I am, right? But what if you got a big radiologist? You might step up, right? Don't come in contact with them. Don't make it creepy. Don't make it weird. You're not spooning, right? But use the radiologist every way you can, okay? Or the PA or whatever. I've got a buddy over in Longview. I think I'll send him this. And tell him I just threw him under the bus. Anybody shadow over Good Shepherd? Yeah. So Shane, probably. Yeah. So if you ever see him, tell him I, throw him under the bus. Here's one of my texts when I worked over in Longview. Time distance shielding. Use it to, you can't do anything about time. You got to be in a room, but you can do something about distance and shielding. Step back, and you can play it off a little bit, and kind of step behind the radiologist and say, "Is that the aortic arch that the esophagus is going?" Make them think that you're doing something besides using them for your own protection. Okay. So any questions on those? Time, distance, shielding, all about you. ALARA, all that other stuff that I was mentioning before is primarily patient dose reduction. And the patient dose reduction does go into your dose reduction too. Some of that same stuff is in your, in some of the old school fluoro towers anyway, for image intensification as well. Okay? Any questions on those? All that.
Do we need to know the formula for the inverse square law of resistance?
Not at this point, no.
Okay.
No. Just know that that as a distance goes up, dose goes down, and then conversely, if distance goes down, dose goes up. Okay, so then we got to talk about the last thing that we're going to talk about. We got just a few minutes left. Are the measurements of radiation exposure. So we've essentially got 3 in diagnostic radiology, and I'm going to give you 2 different terms for each one of those. Okay, so what it used to be was rad, rim, and Rankin. I can give you those tables. All right, so it used to be rad, rim, and Rankin, and they kind of made a switch. And for the most part, you're going to be tested on a registry over the new terms, but there is one that we still use. I'm not real sure why, but that you need to be familiar with as well. So one thing that's important to understand is each one of those, the measure is just perspective, is where we're measuring it. So each one of these, 1 equals 1. In other words, you see 3 different things there. One is air kerma, one is gray, and the other is Sievert. and one means the same as the next. So one air kerma equals one gray equals one sievert. They're all the same unit of measurement, right? But it's just a difference in perspective. So if you read through the definitions just in the penguins themselves, air kerma is a SI unit of radiation exposure. Okay, so air kerma is what we used to refer to as a Rinkin, and that is radiation as it comes out of the X-ray tube before it interacts with anything. Okay, so that's just radiation in air. That's how much output we get out of the X-ray tube. It's not until we get to the tissues that we get into the gray and the sievert. So again, a gray and a sievert are the same quantity of radiation. So the gray is the SI unit of radiation absorbed dose. So that used to be rad. So radiation absorbed dose is your patient exposure. So that's exposure in tissue. Now I want you to look at the symbolic difference between air kerma and gray. So both of them say gray in parentheses, right? GY, but GYA means GY or gray in air, right? So that's your air kerma. And then gray specifically is GY, what does it say? T, in tissue. So it's patient tissue specifically. But if you look over at sievert, sievert, again, a gray and a sievert are the same quantity. One sievert equals one gray. But the difference here is that is going to be your occupational dose. Okay, so that is the dose that you receive, you know, as a technologist, as a student, is a sievert. Your radiation dose, I think, is still, though, in REM. That's rad equivalent man, is what REM stood for. And that was finally my wife, but I think she's going to need to step out. So that's your occupational dose. When you get your occupation, when you log in and see your dose every 3 months, then that's what it's going to read out as, is probably REM. Unless they've made a change, it's going to be REM. It might be sievert, but I think it's still REM. And the final one is radioactivity. So we don't deal with radioactivity in diagnostic, that's nuclear medicine. That's measured out in becquerel. And that used to be, instead of becquerel, it was Curie, named after Madame Curie. And now it's becquerel. Why did they make these changes? I have no idea. No idea. But they are what they are. So air kerma, radiation exposure from the X-ray tube before it hits tissue, that's GYA. GYT is tissue, and specifically patient tissue, and that's gray. And then you've got the sievert, and that's your occupational dose, which is ring. Okay? So we're pretty much right on time. Any questions? So what are you going to do when you're doing a fluoro this week, next week? Step back and hide. Yeah, exactly. Now, there is a time to squat. Okay, so if you're doing a portable X-ray, I think I covered this before. If you're doing portable X-ray, you can't get out of the room. You know, you always got a pen on. You should always have a pen on you or something. You know, maybe keys or something. You know, you're in the patient's room and you're about to make an exposure. You can't get out of the room for whatever reason. You rotor up. Oops. Beep. Yeah, so there's your squat. Don't do that in fluoro, okay? All right, so that's all I have for you.
Do we have a